Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, how are we getting on? Welcome to a brand new Starfield video. So today we are going to take a look at the various factions that we will be meeting in the Settle systems when we get out there in just a few weeks. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of different factions to go through here. We're going to sort of go through them in roughly size order. We're going to start with the larger factions, and then some of the more medium-sized ones that we'll encounter, and a couple of the smaller background factions as well. So, starting at the top, first up, we have the United Colonies. So this is the one we've seen the most of. This is the largest faction in the game. They are the most powerful faction, in big air quotes, whatever that actually ends up meaning. Their capital is New Atlantis, a city on the planet Jameson in the Alpha Centauri system. So this is the one we've seen the most. It's the most traditional science fiction-esque society out there. It's the most obviously sci-fi in a way. The whole idea behind this sort of faction is the Space Republic idea. It's classic ideals of democracy and all that sort of thing, and then sci-fi's it up, which is really cool. So we actually know more about this group than we do about most of the others so far. It's still fairly limited information. So we know their sort of ruling council, their government, is called the Military, Administrative and Scientific Triumvirate, or MAST, which we have pulled out from some of the earlier footage that Bethesda have put out around the various factions. And there's a tiny little bit on a screen somewhere in one of those videos on Bethesda's YouTube channel that's got a screenshot of a lore entry on a terminal that you can actually pause if you find it and read that and get a little bit of information, which is quite cool. So kind of something that was not overt, but interesting piece of information nonetheless. So yeah, Military Administrative Scientific Triumvirate, which is pretty cool. Yeah, that's a ruling council drawn up from different parts of the society as a whole. So I'm guessing the administrative part is the more conventional governmental section of that area. In regards to the military, we know there seems to be sort of two major branches of the military that we're getting at the moment for the United Colonies. That is the UC Vanguard that we've heard about, that looks like we will probably be able to join this group. Judging by what we saw at Starfield Direct, we hear somebody saying, would you like to join them, help protect the United Colonies, and maybe even get citizenship. So this seems like a road we might be able to go down if you want to. The other group out there is referred to in last year, back in 2022, the summer showcase we got then, which showed a United Colonies officer talking about UC Systev, which is kind of hard to hear. The guy's got a bit of an accent as well, so it kind of muddies the waters a little bit, but it seems to be short for United Colonies System Defense. So it seems like these are more kind of police-based border force type role that literally protects from external threats, as opposed to, logically, therefore, the Vanguard, who would be more involved in getting further afield and taking the fight to the threats. So that kind of lines up with the names. Systev is probably system defense, whereas Vanguard is usually the front of an attacking force. So yeah, that all lines up. Of course, who knows, Bethesda may have taken it another route, but that does seem to be the case. Beyond that, we know of one capital-style ship that they seem to have as their military that's been mentioned so far, and that is the UC Vigilance, which is a massive capital ship in the Systev armada, I suppose. Fleet, perhaps, might be a better word. So that's pretty cool. We know we're going to be able to dock with that and explore that massive capital ship, so that's going to be interesting. It's part of our relationship with that particular faction. So other than New Atlantis, we know of one other planet that forms part of the United Colonies. There are probably others as well. It seems like there might be more than just two. It just has that kind of vibe. We'll have to see. And that is the city of Cydonia, which is on Mars in the Solar System. You probably caught that one already. And this is, we think, the first colony that was founded by humanity after they got off of Earth. We don't actually know what's going on Earth yet. That's one piece of information that they have not shared. It does seem likely that we might find out fairly early on in the game, though, so that'll be very cool. But Cydonia on Mars is the largest mining colony that is part of the United Colonies, and this area seems to be, from the tone we've got from the footage we've seen so far, which isn't a lot, but it seems to be benefiting less from the United Colonies' whole kind of space democracy, kind of Starfleet vibe, if you want to throw a little Star Trek reference in there, a whole kind of utopia ideal. that doesn't seem to have quite reached Cydonia so much, as we get things like people working in not particularly stellar conditions. There's a big sign-up saying it's been 11 hours since the last accident, or incident, presumably, which kind of implies, if you've got something like that up, that maybe incidents are a little bit too regular, and possibly with things like worker protections and stuff like that are maybe not quite as enforced or well considered as we might hope there. It looks like it's a less pleasant place to be and to live and work. Of course, that is all somewhat speculative, as we're just sort of getting the feel that we can from the imagery we have on screen so far. So, the second largest faction, and the sort of tail side of the coin if the United Colonies is the head side, is the Freestyle Collective. So these guys look really, really cool, and definitely a group that I'm particularly looking forward to getting involved with. They're the ones that have the kind of space western style and vibe and that sort of aesthetic, which is really, really cool. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. They've got some really amazing looking guns and stuff that are sort of leaning towards this group as opposed to the United Colonies stuff. The United Colonies kind of gear and equipment is a bit more NASA meets industrial, whereas the Freestyle Collective, their stuff is more sort of old school Wild West meets sci-fi, and it's a great aesthetic. But they are more of a liberal collective. They're not such a centralized government type of organization. They're a lot more free, laid back, do your own thing, just don't screw people over. That kind of vibe. Their capital city is Aquila City, that is on the planet of Aquila, and that is in the XIon system. And we know there are at least a handful of other planets and systems that are part of the Freestyle Collective, one of them being Neon, I'll touch on again in a second. Over on Aquila, there does seem to be an organisation who are, I don't know if they're specifically military, they seem to be more of a peacekeeping kind of, police force is perhaps not the right word, but somewhere between the police and Jedi, but with guns, I guess, and Wild West. So that kind of weird societal position and role isn't quite analogous to anything that we really have in society at the moment. And that is the Freestyle Rangers, who are, as I say, peacekeepers, and they seem that they might be joinable in the way that, say, the UC Vanguard also seems the same for the United Colonies, and will possibly be contributing to where they go, what they're doing, and the ideals that they are bringing to the Freestyle Collective through our own actions and choices, which is quite cool. Their headquarters at a location called The Rock, which we don't know much about other than it's where they are based, which is probably near, if not in, Aquila City. It does seem to have a very, very cool stuffed kind of monster in there that looks quite cool, and I have no doubt we'll find versions that are not stuffed and are inclined towards ripping our heads off at some point. And the other thing that we know about in Aquila City, other than having seen a few shots of the street and the massive walls around it, which are apparently designed to keep the nasty wildlife out, is that there is a market and there is a location somewhere in there called the Stone Root Inn, which is apparently an Aquila City fixture in quotes there, because that's what it says, or one of the characters says in the showcase from the summer. And yeah, we don't know anything about it other than it seems to be some kind of bar and a relatively central location, and I imagine it will figure quite sizably in, if not the main quest, at the very least a bunch of side quests. I imagine we'll find a lot of people in there. So that sounds quite cool. One of the other areas in the Freestyle Collective that we kind of know about is Neon, and I suspect with Neon we're going to find they're technically part of the Freestyle Collective, but they're really kind of a law unto themselves, because they have their own very, very distinct style and vibe, and that is the fishing platform turned into a pleasure city on the planet of Volley, or Volley Alpha, I believe it is, in the Volley system. Obviously, this was set up after the Xenofresh, I think the corporation was called, that initially founded the city, discovered that the fish they were harvesting could be used to produce Aurora, a drug that was far more lucrative than just selling fish. So they did, and Neon was born. It's also the headquarters of a company called Reagent, who we will likely be able to join on some level as well. And it's, it's very much sort of a law unto itself. It's, gambling, it's drugs, it's nightlife, but it's like Vegas from hell, I'm guessing is kind of the vibe that we're getting there, with a lot less rules and stuff. So that's going to be an interesting kind of cyberpunk sci-fi place to explore that is also part of, technically, the Freestyle Collective. When talking about these two factions, the other thing we have to mention is the Colony War. This is a series of battles, a war that was fought in 2310, which is about 20 years prior to the actual setting of the game. between the United Colonies and the Freestyle Collective. As it currently stands, we don't know too much about this conflict, other than the end result was the Freestyle Collective maintaining their independence. So if they didn't win, they got more or less the outcome they wanted from the sound of it. But there is a relatively tense peace between the two factions. They're certainly not friendly from the sound of things. And it seems to be the case that sort of the impact of this particular conflict, the scars of it, and so on and so forth, are still being felt and influencing the societies 20 years on. So it must have been a pretty brutal conflict for what seems to be a relatively short one. We also know from some animated shorts that Bethesda put out quite recently that there were single-pilot mechs being used as part of this war, because we see one of the characters' parents in this animated short were killed as mech pilots. They're sort of killed in battle. I really suspect that, contrary to some of what I've seen out there on the internet, the mechs won't be figuring significantly in Starfield, and we absolutely are not going to be able to use them, ride them, pilot them, whatever. I think they'll probably be maybe referenced in the background, but I don't think they'll be particularly significant. The way the game looks to be set up, the way the movement works, the way exploration works, I think you're either going to be in a spaceship or you're going to be on your own 2 feet with a jetpack, and I don't think there's going to be anything else out there. I think vehicles and mechs like that are just not going to be a thing. Exactly how they're going to deal with that in a lore sense, who knows, but yeah, it doesn't seem like something that we'll be actually able to directly engage in. It's just a background thing, I suspect. So, moving on from the two largest factions, we come onto the more middling-sized ones. So the big one there is the Crimson Fleet Pirates. So these are essentially faction number 3, I guess, or 4, depending on whether or not you want to consider Neon its own thing. They are a decent-sized faction, but obviously not on the level of something like the Freestyle Collective or the United Colonies. So they are a loose alliance of basically independent pirate captains that sort of have an alliance. They work together as a kind of fleet or armada, but they're not really too closely affiliated. They don't have the same structure and central command structure in quite the same way that, say, a more established actual faction would. We do know they're going to be joinable. We also know that their headquarters, that we found out over the summer at Starfield Direct, is a space station called the Key, which is presumably a station that the various independent pirates can dock at, blow off some steam, trade with each other, and so on and so forth, and potentially pick up some more crew, that sort of thing, but also likely to be somewhat rough from the look of things. They seem to have an attitude that once you're in the Crimson Fleet, the only way you leave is if you die, which is one way of maintaining a certain level of cohesion, but not particularly pleasant. They are supposed to be the bad guys after all, they are pirates. From the look of things, they are going to crop up quite often as antagonists. We do see occasions where the player is fighting against them. They are a joinable faction though, so what will happen when you do that, who knows? I'm guessing they'll become less hostile on the whole to you. There seems to be a couple of different angles you can take. You can join them and basically be a pirate, I guess, be sort of honestly part of the faction, and I use honest in big air quotes there. And then you can do sort of missions for them, possibly run smuggling missions for them, stuff like that, because we do know smuggling is going to be a thing. Interesting thing, potentially, as well. But the other side of it that's also been mentioned by the devs is that you can join them with a view to being sort of in support of, say, the United Colonies, presumably also the Freestyle Collective, but it was kind of leaning towards the EC. And when you do, you'll be able to basically go undercover space cop and take them down from the inside, which would be potentially an interesting way to approach that as well. In terms of sort of history of the Crimson Fleet, we don't have a vast amount at the moment. One thing we do know is they started out sort of nearer to the Freestyle Collective side of the settled systems, wherever that may be, and they were considered more of a Freestyle Collective problem by the United Colonies for quite a while. Until recently, according to the timeline of the game anyway, when they expand out and become way more of a threat to the United Colonies and sort of control more systems and start attacking the UC a bit more as well. And again, I referred to that on-screen lore entry that we could see in one of the videos way back that Bethesda put out, and again, this is coming from that same source. Okay, so the next of the medium-sized factions that we know about is Reagent Industries. So these guys are headquartered on Neon, as I mentioned before, and they are basically a mega corporation with massive numbers of different products that they spread throughout the settled systems. And we do know that we're going to be able to join this faction and basically get a job with the company. So one of the things that Bethesda wanted to do with this game is that you can join factions, but you're not going to be rising all the way up to the top to become the leader of every single faction, like you could in, say, Skyrim. It's going to be a bit more realistic than that. You'll be just another cog in the big machine, effectively. With a couple of exceptions, anyway. But with Reagent, you'll be able to get a job and go and work for them, and presumably do your job for them. In all likelihood, this is going to involve some probably quite shady behaviour from the vibe we get. The animated shorts we had recently were talking about street rat life in Neon, and they were somewhat intimidated by the rich and powerful Reagent Industries staff, owners, managers, whatever. And what they seemed willing to do to people who were not part of the company was pretty brutal, so we can expect this to be a not particularly friendly group of people. Fairly cutthroat sort of cyberpunk-esque mega-corporation, I guess. So that's quite cool. And since we're talking about middle-sized factions, we'd be kind of remiss if we didn't mention Constellation as well. Obviously, this is the primary player faction. This is the group we're going to be joining. Absolutely have to join if you want to advance the story. This seems to be the group that will be giving us our first ship, the Frontier, although we'll be able to collect others through either trading or through taking them over as well. But Constellation are viewed as an almost sort of mythical group in a way. They were supposedly quite famous a while back, but now people kind of forget they exist. They're obviously not what they once were. They're viewed as being the last group of space explorers, and they will be, as I say, the group that is interested in the artifacts that the player finds and organising the search for more and wherever that storyline goes, which we'll find out in a few weeks. So we know they're based in New Atlantis, I think. Their headquarters is called The Lodge, from what I've seen, but the direct connection between their headquarters and that name is a bit iffy. Seems likely, but we will see. They're led by Sarah Morgan, who is a blonde lady with the awesome jacket, and we have a few other significant members that you can see in Starfield Direct. For example, there is Walter, who is a United Colonies businessman, and he finances Constellation's endeavours. So the guy seems to have buttloads of money. He seems he's possibly involved in Starship production, or the company he owns, or something to that effect, or is one of the senior partners in. But we'll find out more about him soon, obviously. We have a chap called Matteo, who is a theologian and believes in alien life. We have Noelle, who is a young prodigy scientist. Seems like a fairly cool young lady. And that chap Barrett, who seems to be a Starship engineer, but also fancies himself a chef from the look of things. And he looks to be an interesting bloke as well. So, yeah, obviously these guys are going to be our core faction. They're going to be the main group that we're hanging out with. They're going to comprise the core group of our spaceship's crew as well. And the main group of companions that we can explore the settled systems with. And that many, if not all, of the romance options are drawn from this group as well. So, moving on to the last couple of small factions, we have a couple of religious groups and some NPC factions that are either partially kind of vaguely joinable, but mostly not, as far as I can tell. So, this kind of ties into the perk system as well. So we have House Varun, who are a group of cultist fanatics who are likely to be somewhat antagonistic. That is, unless you take the appropriate trait during character creation, which is called Serpent's Embrace, which basically makes you the same religion as them. So that will probably quite significantly impact your interactions with them. But otherwise, they're a group of fanatics who worship the Great Serpent. And exactly where that's going to go, we'll have to see. But they seem to be very much into the wipe out non-believers school of thought, which is, all about that religious freedom, clearly. But yeah, they're going to be an interesting kind of extreme fanatic group, which will be quite fun to encounter. So we know, kind of, that there are two other groups that seem to be religious groups that are in the subtle systems, the Starfield universe, and that is the Enlightened and the Sanctum Universum. So these we can kind of pull out of the trait system. You can pick these religions, and they kind of lock out the other two as well. Exactly what they're going to be involved with, presumably being slightly less crazy than the House Varun types, but yep, we know these guys have headquarters in, or at least some kind of location that they're involved with. I hesitate to use kind of church temple because we just don't know enough about them, but something to that effect maybe, that are based in New Atlantis that the player will have access to if you take the trait that makes you part of that group. Exactly how much the involvement will be with them, again, we're going to have to wait and find out. There's huge amounts about this game that we just don't know yet. But yeah, 3 weeks, we'll soon find out about these groups as well. So the last couple of groups to talk about are the Ecliptic Mercenaries and the Spacers, who basically seem to exist as hostile NPC factions, somewhat akin to Raiders in the Fallout series. We'll have to see where that goes, but so far all we've seen of them is them existing as antagonists for the player, and you run into them at random outposts and all around the settled systems, generally getting up to no good. They seem to be, if not outright criminal groups, then people who are living on that edge of those fringes of society. So there we go. Well, that's all the factions that we know about in Starfield so far, ranging from the absolutely massive with the United Colonies down to the little NPC factions as well. So it could be very interesting to get into finding out more about them and what's going on. There are a couple of other little groups around which could potentially be classified as factions that we know almost nothing about as well. For example, somebody's talking about the Red Mile, and it's a very, very brief section in Starfield Direct. We see one of the characters there. What that might involve, it almost sounds like some kind of gauntlet that you might have to run. It seems to be an interesting group, and there'll be other tiny little clusters of people groups around as well that we can interact with and encounter their stories, stuff like that. But we don't know enough about them to really cover in any detail, and whether or not we'd really call them factions, maybe, maybe not. But nonetheless, it'll be interesting to get to know these various groups as well in around and about 3 weeks. So very, very excited to get stuck into all of that stuff. So, thank you very much for watching. Hope you found this useful, informative, and interesting regarding all the factions in Starfield. Can't wait to jump into it. Let me know which factions you're most interested in joining. Personally, I'm leaning somewhat more towards Freestyle Collective because I think their aesthetic is awesome. But I'd love to hear your take on that as well. Let me know in the comments down below. And while we're down there, we've got social media links, merch store, likes, subs, channel memberships, all that good stuff down there. If you're interested in checking that stuff out and supporting the channel in that way, humongously helps out. So I really, really appreciate that. Massive thank you to everybody who has done that. And if you get a chance to join us for live streams as well, we are, of course, playing Fallout 76 as per usual. We're working through a few other bits and pieces in the wait for Starfield, mostly Wolfenstein at the moment. And yeah, we'll be diving into Starfield just as soon as we possibly can. So I cannot wait for that. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you all very, very soon.